In 1975, a photographer touring with Kenny Rogers' band captured a single image backstage that nobody published for years. When it finally surfaced, the people who recognized what it showed had to decide whether to call it a historical document or just a photograph. The distinction matters because what a photograph is and what a photograph shows are not always the same thing. The year 1975 was, for Kenny Rogers, a year of transition that was not yet clearly defined as a transition. He had left the first edition in 1974, ending a band that had produced genuine commercial success. Just Dropped In and Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town had both crossed into mainstream awareness. The band had a television presence, and the combination of psychedelic folk rock and country storytelling they'd been doing for years had built an audience that Kenny would carry with him into his solo career, even if the two things would eventually look very different from each other. By 1975, the band was over, and the solo career had not yet produced the records that would define it. Lucille was 2 years away. The Gambler was 3 years away. What existed in 1975 was the space between what had been and what was coming, which, from the inside of it, simply felt like work. The photographer who accompanied the band during this period was doing what tour photographers did in that era, documenting the logistics of a touring life, without particular interest in the manufactured moments that press photography in that era usually produced. The formal shots, the performer at the microphone, the performer with a crowd, the performer shaking hands with some civic official who had come backstage, those had their own logic and their own purpose. The informal shots were something else. Images made in the margins of an event, backstage and on the bus, and in the brief windows between sound check and showtime, that captured what a touring life actually looked like when no one was managing the image. Not because Kenny Rogers was performing the quality of transition for the camera. He didn't know the camera was there. But because 1975 was genuinely that kind of year for him. And the photograph caught a real thing rather than a composed one. When photographs like this surface, images from a period between a recognizable beginning and a recognizable peak, made by someone who was there for the work rather than for the documentation of the work, they tend to generate a particular kind of response from people who care about the subject. There is an impulse to contextualize, to frame the image within the narrative that the subject's career eventually produced, to read the expression in light of what came next, rather than in light of what was happening at the moment of the shutter. Kenny Rogers in this photograph becomes, in the telling, Kenny Rogers on the eve of his breakthrough, a man about to become something larger, caught in the last moment before the larger thing happened. This is a reasonable reading. It's also a retrospective one, which means it's partially an invention. The truth of the photograph is that it shows a person in a specific place at a specific time, doing the specific work of building something that wasn't guaranteed to succeed. The breakthrough that came later is not visible in the image because it hadn't happened yet. What is visible is the work, the touring, the building, the presence in mid-sized markets, the willingness to do what needed to be done without the scale of success that would later seem to justify it. That's the thing that the image shows that no other kind of document from this period quite captures. Not the Kenny Rogers that The Gambler made famous, not the Kenny Rogers that Las Vegas celebrated, not the crossover star or the country icon or the Grammy winner. Just the person doing the job in 1975 in a folding chair backstage at a mid-sized venue an hour before a show that would be performed well and then packed up and moved to the next city. The image in question was made backstage at a venue on a mid-sized market tour in 1975. The specifics of the venue don't change what the image shows, but the context matters. This was not a Las Vegas headlining engagement or a major market show. It was a mid-level booking on a tour that was doing the necessary work of establishing a solo artist's presence in markets where the first edition had been known, but Kenny Rogers, the solo act, was still being introduced. These shows were important without being glamorous, necessary without being celebrated. The kind of work that built a career without appearing in anyone's account of what a career was built on. The photograph shows Kenny Rogers backstage. Alone, or nearly alone. The band is somewhere else. The crew is somewhere else. The show is an hour away. He is sitting in whatever kind of chair a backstage area in 1975 provided, which is to say a folding chair or a metal stacking chair, or a chair borrowed from a green room that had been converted from a storage closet. He is not performing. He is not being managed. He is simply there, in the specific way that people are simply somewhere when they don't know they're being observed. What the image captures, and this is the thing that made it, when it eventually surfaced, more than a casual snapshot, is the particular quality of a person in a transitional moment. Kenny Rogers in 1975, in that image, is visibly someone in the middle of something. Not at the beginning, not at the end, not at a peak, but somewhere in the process of becoming something that he can't yet fully see. The expression, if you know what you're looking for, has the quality of someone carrying a project they haven't finished, present, thoughtful, slightly inward. The way people look when the work they're doing requires more of them than the moment they're in. This sounds like a description that could be made up. It isn't. The image actually shows this. The photograph was eventually published, years later, as part of a retrospective of touring photography from the mid-1970s. The caption identified it correctly. Kenny Rogers, backstage, 1975. The people who wrote about it generally focused on its historical value as a document of a transitional period in his career. They weren't wrong. But the thing that gave it value wasn't primarily historical. The thing that gave it value was simpler than that. It showed something true. A real person in a real place at a real moment doing real work without anyone constructing anything around it. That kind of truth is rarer in the archive of any famous career than the formal portraits and the stage photographs and the press images, because it requires, by its nature, that the subject not know the camera is there. The photographer who made it understood this eventually, which is why they kept it, and the people who saw it when it finally surfaced understood it too, that what they were looking at was not just a historical document, but something slightly more valuable than that. Evidence that the person in the photograph was real. Most of the images that survive from the careers of major artists are images of performances, of the public self, the managed self, the self that is consciously being an artist in front of an audience. These images are valuable. They document what the career looked like from the outside, which is where most people experienced it. But the images that last, the ones that people return to when they want to understand something about the person rather than the career, are usually images like this one. Made in 1975 in a backstage room that wasn't designed to be remembered, by a photographer who was there for the work rather than for the image, of a person who didn't know that decades later someone would look at the photograph and feel like they'd met him. That's what a photograph like this one actually shows. Not a historical document, not a career milestone, just a person doing the work before anyone knew how the story was going to end.